this place, it's the image, you know, Margaux, there is a wine, of course, and the prestige of the wine is the chateau. So when people come here, they must arrive in a place which is magnificent, you know, like the wine. And of course, you know, everything must be impeccable, we say.
Perfect.
Perfect.
It's nice, huh? It's very impressive, very intimidating.
Corinne Mentzelopoulos is the chatelaine of Margaux. She inherited this temple to wine from her father, a Greek supermarket tycoon who bought it in 1977.
Attends, je suis fatiguée, Zorba. I'm tired. Don't knock me over. Don't knock me over. Oui, je t'aime. Je t'aime.
Do you remember first coming here?
Yes. I don't remember the chateau that well. It's funny, I remember the cellar. And I remember my father signing, taking the hand of the owners and saying it's a done deal. That I remember. But the chateau, it's funny, it's a blur in my head.
Chateau Margaux is regarded by some as the greatest wine estate in the world, the very pinnacle of wine culture. One of the sacred group of 5 Bordeaux chateaux known as the First Growths, Margaux has a global following and commands gobsmacking prices. A good vintage can cost upwards of £1,000 a bottle.
We have to deal with nature. So we don't create scarcity. We have real scarcity. We're farmers. You have great vintages and then you have a lesser vintage. You're not in control.
This is the story of the creation of one vintage at Margaux, the 2008, that may or may not prove to be a blockbuster. But it is also the story of a cultural icon that commands almost religious devotion. Margaux's objective is perfection, and those who aspire to drink it seek a form of personal transformation. And yet, every Eden has its serpent. And in the Margaux wonderland, the one thing over which there is no control is the one thing that really matters. The weather. It is the weather that will determine the fortunes and future of the chateau. Today, at the end of March, Chateau Margaux is in the process of showing off its wines to the world. And on show is the 2007 vintage, when the weather was dreadful. In Bordeaux, no one ever talks about a bad vintage. At its worst, a year may be described as modest. By common consent, 2007 was a modest year for Bordeaux generally, but for Paul Pontellier, director and chief winemaker, the task today is to convince the visitors that Margaux triumphed over the elements.
I know by experience that this wine in 30 or 40 years' time will still be fresh, pleasant, for people who are interested in drinking, not just collecting. These vintages are wonderful. They are at the very heart of Chateau Margaux's gift, which is exactly to produce wines with that extra level of subtlety, finesse, and balance.
I purchase wines for Korean Japan people.
Yeah.
Sometimes in auction Christie's.
Okay, you should.
Yeah, many Asian people in the same.
The Bordeaux First Growths have long ceased to be the preserve of the claret-drinking countries of old Europe.
Asia is becoming a very important
Very important.
market. It's not that high, but it's growing fast.
As custodian of Margaux, Paul is a celebrity in the world of wine, and sprinkling his stardust on the visitors is all part of the sales process.
It's difficult to know.
Margaux produces 3 wines in all. The celebrated Grand Vin itself, a lesser red made from the grapes that didn't quite make the grade, and a Sauvignon Blanc. Over the next 2 weeks, about 2,000 brokers, merchants and journalists will visit. Their feedback will help determine how much Margaux will charge for the wine.
So you're pleased with 07?
I think people will, in general, find it better than expected. The first question we had this morning was, so how did you do with the terrible weather? We said, wait a minute, there was a terrible weather, but we waited, and then we harvested in perfect conditions.
Beautifully pure.
And it's refreshing.
It's very refreshing, yeah. It's
I've swallowed mine. I've been drinking quite a lot today. That's why I'm in such a good mood. You know? In fact, I'm wiped out, you know.
There has been a wine estate at Margaux since the 17th century. And some of the practices have remained unchanged ever since. The cellar workers are racking the wine. It's a sort of decanting process that ensures that sediment doesn't build up. The wine is poured from one barrel to another, and the candle allows the workers to see when the sediment appears. There are about 1,300 barrels of the 2006 vintage, currently spending their second and final year in the cellars.
Ah, ça nous arrive de le goûter, oui. Pas régulièrement parce que bon, on le travaille si on le goûtait, mais bon, une fois dans la journée, comme ça, quand on travaille, on goûte un petit peu, et oui, et puis ça fait partie, ça fait partie aussi du travail de voir si, de suivre l'évolution du vin en fait. Voilà.
Although the cellar looks like something from the Da Vinci Code, it was built in 1982, part of a series of massive investments since the Greeks arrived in the Médoc. The collective memory of Margaux is contained in this cellar, where the spiders are not just for decoration, they eat the pests that might otherwise eat the corks. In the course of his professional duties, Paul has tasted every vintage that survives, a process of enlightenment that has turned him into Margaux's greatest